Alright, let's talk about something a little bit more advanced, and those are MITM attacks or man-in-the-middle attacks. Now, many of you have probably heard of these before, maybe even executed these attacks, but it's important that we know in details how these attacks work. Now, when it comes to man-in-the-middle attacks, it can be done in many different ways. One of the most common MITM attacks uses ARP spoofing technique. But before we even talk about MITM attacks and how they work, let us first quickly recap the ARP protocol, what it is, why it is used, and how ARP spoofing works. So, the Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP protocol, is a crucial protocol used in IP networks to map a known IP address to a MAC address. Since devices communicate on the same local network using MAC addresses, ARP is necessary for resolving the corresponding MAC address of a given IP address. ARP operates with two main packet types, ARP requests and ARP replies. Now, when it comes to ARP request, let's say a device A wants to communicate with another device, in this case, device B. Now, both of these devices are on the same network. Device A only knows the IP address of device B. So what does it do? Well, it broadcasts an ARP request. This packet contains the IP address of the target device, or device B in this case, and it asks the entire network who has this IP address. Then comes the ARP reply. The device with corresponding IP address, which in this case is device B, responds with an ARP reply. This packet, or this ARP reply, contains the MAC address of the device B, which then allows device A to send data to the device B. Once device A has the MAC address, it stores it in its ARP cache to speed up future communications. Alright, so that is ARP protocol and how it works. But what is ARP spoofing attack? ARP spoofing, which is also known as ARP poisoning, is a type of attack where an attacker sends falsified ARP messages over a local network. The goal of this attack is to associate the attacker's MAC address with the IP address of another device, typically a router or another network device. Once this association is established, the attacker can intercept, modify, or even stop traffic intended for the legitimate device. Now, in an ARP spoofing attack, the attacker typically sends two types of forged ARP messages. The first one is a spoofed ARP reply that associates the attacker's MAC address with the target's IP address, for example, the gateway or the router being the target, and another spoofed reply that associates the attacker's MAC address with the victim's IP address, which could be a network device, for example. As a result, any traffic meant for the victim or the router is instead sent to the attacker's machine. Then the attacker chooses to forward the packets between the two target devices. But why is this attack dangerous? Well, ARP spoofing is dangerous because it compromises the integrity of network communications. By tricking devices into sending their data to the attacker can perform a variety of malicious actions such as eavesdropping, data interception and modification, and denial of service. And when it comes to data interception, the attacker can alter data packets before forwarding them to the original destination. So if the traffic between two target machines is unencrypted, then the attacker can pretty much see all the data in plain text. Alright, so what does ARP spoofing have to do with man-in-the-middle attack? Well, ARP spoofing is often a technique that is used as a part of man-in-the-middle attack. In a man-in-the-middle attack, the attacker intercepts the communication between two parties, making it seem as though they are communicating directly with each other, while in reality the attacker is relaying and possibly modifying the messages. For example, if the attacker positions themselves between a user and the router, they can intercept sensitive information, such as login credentials, financial data, or private communications. They can modify the data being exchanged, which could result in the victim receiving fake or altered information. For example, imagine the target wants to download a simple file from a certain website. Once they download the file ends up being malware. Well, that is the possibility of the attack, as the attacker can actually exchange the file in download and make the target download whatever the attacker wants. Also, the attacker can impersonate the victim or the router, which we already mentioned, and that could result in gaining access to protected resources. Now, man-in-the-middle attacks are quite dangerous because they can compromise the confidentiality and integrity of communications without the user even realizing it. So, unless the user checks, they pretty much have no idea that the attack is taking place. So, enough about ARP spoofing being dangerous. How can we actually prevent or detect ARP spoofing and man-in-the-middle attacks? Well, there are several techniques to prevent or detect ARP spoofing and man-in-the-middle attacks. One of those is static ARP entries. This refers to manually configuring static ARP entries, and like this you can prevent devices from accepting spoofed ARP replies. However, this could be difficult to manage in larger networks. You can also implement ARP spoofing detection tools like ARP Watch or XARP Monitor, and this can monitor ARP traffic for suspicious changes in IP to MAC mappings. Network segmentation is another good security measure. Since segmenting the network into smaller subnets or using virtual LANs, you can limit the attacker's ability to poison ARP tables across the entire network. You also want to have switch port security, as many switches support port security features such as limiting the number of MAC addresses allowed on a single port, or binding MAC addresses to specific ports, which can prevent MAC spoofing. Encryption is also important, since even if an attacker, let's say, intercepts the data, encryption protocols like HTTPS or SSH can prevent them from reading or modifying sensitive information. And lastly, you can implement IDS and IPS systems. There are tools like Snort that can detect and block ARP spoofing attempts by analyzing network traffic for abnormal ARP activity.